Well, hello. We're still continuing our Let's Talk series through James, and we're trying to look at some teaching that James gave 2,000 years ago that we think still kind of relates to stuff that we're dealing with today. And today, James is going to talk about the issue of favoritism or prejudice. Prejudice, in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, is an unfair feeling of dislike for a person or group because of their race or their sex or their religion or their wealth or any number of other things. There's different things we can do to prejudge. That's what prejudice, of course, means, to prejudge somebody and to not really give them a fair shake before they've ever had a chance to even get to know us or talk. When James talks about that in James chapter 2, here's how he describes it. He says, "My brothers and sisters, believers in our glorious Jesus Christ, you must not show favoritism. Suppose a man comes into your meeting wearing a gold ring and fine clothes, and a poor man and filthy old clothes also comes in. If you show special treatment to the man wearing fine clothes and say, 'Here's a good seat for you,' but say to the poor man, 'You stand there or sit on the floor by my feet,' have you not discriminated amongst yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts?" He says, "Listen, my dear brothers and sisters, has God not chosen those who are poor in the eyes of the world to be rich in faith and to inherit the kingdom he promised to those who love him? But you," James says to the church, "have dishonored the poor. Is it not the rich who are exploiting you? Are they not the ones who are dragging you into court?" And then eventually he'll say you need to love your neighbor as yourself and not to show favoritism. So that idea and that section there out of James chapter 2, we kind of wanted to talk about that because our culture today is divided by any number of different things. I mean, certainly wealth can be a big divider, but there's a bunch of other things too.
This one's interesting to me just because where the church I came from in California, I think I saw this more there than here, and it maybe just be the demographics of Bedford, right? There's a lot more American people, dare I say white people,
Sure,
in this area. So it's different over there. When I remember as a young follower of Jesus reading this and seeing some of that happen in our church. I mean, we had a lot of homeless people and people who were on drugs that would show up to church because it was cool.
Right.
The weather, the AC was on, right? And it was hot outside, so they just
literally
show up.
Cool.
Yes,
not
it wasn't hip,
right.
yeah.
Right.
And they'd walk in, and I've seen leadership pull homeless people and say, "Can you sit in the back because you're being distracting," or they smelled or they looked dirty, and I've seen that, and that made me scratch my head all the time. That doesn't seem right.
Right.
And then you read passages like this where it tells us exactly what we should be doing and what we're doing if we're treating people in a way that we shouldn't. So I think just in itself, it's really interesting, and then let alone adding whatever's going on in the world right now. It is an issue that, when we, today we decided we were going to talk about this stuff, and it's like, this is a different topic today than it would have been 2 years ago.
Right. And we're divided. I mean, truthfully, anybody that you partner yourself up with, there's hundreds of points of division. Gabe and I are divided by different things, by race and by age. I'm a lot older, fantastically, almost twice as old as Gabe is.
Literally twice as old.
Twice. Yeah. Anyway, quite a bit older, and different family situations, different upbringing, different maybe even political beliefs about different. I mean, there's 1,000 different things divide you, and really the big unity that Gabe and I have is found in Christ, and that's really what James is pushing for here too. When someone comes into your meeting, you want to try to find the points of commonality, and especially if those commonalities are your faith in Christ, that should bring us together, and that should be a strong enough thing to overcome all the other stuff. And so what's the lesson for us here today? Well, the first thing is I think we have to be sensitive to the ways that we might do that, the ways that we might be prejudiced and look at someone and quickly make assumptions about them based on how they dress or how they carry themselves or how they racial or gender or any number of things. We just got to be very careful about that. It makes me nervous if I hear a Christian quickly dismiss someone because, well, that's how they are. Just because of something like that, we got to be careful. Even with the jokes we make, it's very easy, especially in church on gender things, to make little jokes. Well, women are like that, or men. What are you going to do? And just be careful about that stuff. When you immediately prejudge someone because of those things, the Bible's pretty clear. We're not to do that.
Right. And if anything, it says you love your neighbor as yourself. James says, after that. If you're doing that, then you're doing things right. So what does that mean, loving your neighbor as yourself? How is that going to help us combat prejudice?
That's a tough one, and it's one I've had to think about here lately with some different things. Sometimes with myself, I can be kind of a loner, just about my personality and about how I come across. And so because I'm kind of a loner, I have a tendency to miss important days. I have a tendency to miss important events. I really don't want a lot of guys coming to me to say, hey, it's your birthday. Let's all sing and talk about how great you are. I mean, I don't really enjoy that. Well, how great you are, I probably like that, but I don't really enjoy being the center of attention. Everybody's looking at you and smiling. I don't really totally enjoy that part of the process. So I very rarely, 'cause I'm trying to love my neighbor, think about doing that to somebody else. I wouldn't like it, so I don't do it to them either. But the hard part is other people do like that sort of thing. They do want you to remember those special events. They do want you to remember those special things. And so I could think that it's the same thing you run into marriage. I can think that I'm loving Julia the very best way I can because I'm doing for her what I hope she does for me. What real love is, I think about what it is that she wants. I think about what would really bless her, what she would really appreciate, and that might not necessarily be mine. This is not the right time on our video here to get into the whole concept of privilege and what privilege is, but certain races, certain genders, certainly wealth levels enjoy certain privilege that other people don't enjoy. And maybe from a position, if I'm privileged, I might think that, well, I've got certain things here, and I might not be as sensitive to someone else who doesn't have those same privileges, and vice versa. In areas where I might tend to think of myself as not having the popular thing, whatever the popular thing is, and quickly assume that the other person, man, they know what they're doing when they ignore me. They know what they're doing when they're taking advantage, and they may not know at all. So loving your neighbor is trying to see things from their perspective and then moving from that.
So see what you just said about the certain type of privilege, I think that's why we knew this one was going to be a tricky one, is because when we talk about things like this, we know there's going to be people that are watching this video that are going to think, well, I don't think that's true. Right. Or I don't think that there's a certain privilege, and it's hard because as people who work at a church, as ministers, it seems like that's something that we really shouldn't get into because that's going to cause a divide. But I think that's the problem. I mean, James is talking about this. There is a certain favoritism. See, this is maybe it's a little different, right? There's favoritism in the church, but I think the roots of it there are some prejudices that we do have as people. Right, so maybe let's let aside government and things that just as people we judge people differently based on race, gender, how they look, how they dress, and I want to focus on that. We're not going to talk about systemic racism. We're not going to talk about.
Right.
I think it's needed.
Sure.
But in this specific case, it's the favoritism that we show someone. Or lack of that we show in the church. And I think that is important to talk about as well. I know that at the church I went to, I could have been received in a very different way.
Right.
But honestly, I think I'm here today because I was shown favoritism.
Right.
People did care for me. I was, illegal at the time that I started going to church, and my mom, we didn't have a lot of money, and we had to work and do things. And the church loved on us.
Right.
They welcomed us. They helped us. They gave us connections. It was such a blessing to be in a church that saw who we were and embraced us instead of just letting us go. Right. Or said, well, maybe we shouldn't help these people. They're illegal. If we help them, maybe we'll get in trouble. Or no,
right.
They decided to see who we were, flaws and all, and help us. And there's so many people that don't receive that.
Right.
And that's why I get passionate about not showing favoritism in the bad way. Is there a word for showing favoritism to everyone? I guess it's just loving everyone.
It's just loving everyone. And your story is a great story. I mean, the thing that makes us ultimately privileged is that Jesus died for us. And when you realize that you've never locked eyes with anybody that Christ didn't lay down his life for, it should change your view of that person. In James's deal, and still today in ours, having really expensive clothes or a really expensive car or a really expensive house is going to open certain doors for you in society. It just does, and I wish it weren't that way, but it is that way, and vice versa. If your clothes are really bad, or if your car is really bad, or if your house is really bad, people might judge you about those sorts of things. But real privilege is knowing that Christ loves us, and the church ought to be a place where everybody feels privileged by that. It should break down all the walls, and no matter who you are, no matter what your economic situation is, no matter what your race is, no matter what your gender is, no matter what your sexual preference is, no matter what any of that is, that should be the thing that tears down all the walls, is that Christ died for us, all of us, and it should put us on pretty level ground at the foot of the cross.
So then you're saying that the prejudice comes in when people decide to say, well, because I don't agree with you or you don't agree with me, I choose to treat you less than, or not pay attention to you, or
no, very much so. And again, well, it's subtle, and I don't know. But we're trying to be very careful about these sessions. They don't get very long. We're trying to watch our time. This is easily one that we could spend 2 or 3 or 4 hours on, and still have new things to talk about. But you recognize when you do it, you do. A certain person comes in and they're attractive for one reason or another, and you find yourself gravitating towards that person. Another person comes in and they're not attractive for one reason or another, and you find yourself avoiding them. And that's the thing James is saying. We just can't do that because God, at our very most unattractive, chose us and brought us in to be close to Him. And James's advice is, if we're going to be followers of Him, then we have to make sure that we approach other people the same way He does. No barriers, no walls, no prejudice.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting to me. I'm Mexican. I was born in Mexico, and we did go through a lot of things as I was growing up. So in light of all those things, I see all this differently. When I read the Bible and I see Jesus being with the untouchables, with the prostitutes and the tax collectors, which were just people no one wanted to be around. I don't know what that would look like today, the tax collector, whatever. But so I read that and I think, okay, Jesus says we need to reach these people. We need to talk to them. James says we don't show favoritism. Doesn't matter how you dress, what you do. That makes sense. But it's interesting to see how the church doesn't operate like that many times. We are prejudiced. We do judge people. We do write some people off. And I have a hard time understanding that. I'm not trying to come off as this holier than thou. I see the way and I don't see how others don't. But I think there is a disconnect, and maybe it's just because of my background. Like I am on the receiving end. I am the person here that showed up with the bad clothing, and I was the one welcomed and given the best seat.
Right.
So to me, it's really easy to say, well, yeah, that's what we're supposed to do. It makes sense.
Right.
So what do you think that's about? Like, what do you think it's so hard for people to share that love, to love others as they love themselves? And actually, just to describe that, because we haven't talked about it, what does it mean to love your neighbor as yourself? What do you do for yourself? Right? You take care of yourself. You make sure you don't smell. You have your clothes. You make sure you're fed. That taking care of yourself, I think that's what it's talking about. You take care of others as you take care of yourself. You love on yourself a lot. You make sure that you have what you need. Well, do that for others. And again, me being on that receiving end of people taking care of me when we had no way of taking care of ourselves, well, I want to do that. But it seems to be a struggle in the church. And not our church. We're not talking about our. It's just the church. It seems to be hard for people to want to take care of others. What do you think that's about?
Two things can be true at the same time. One thing that's true is this has always been a problem in the church. That's why James writes what he does. It was a problem then. It's still a problem. It's one of those things that creeps in. And when you allow your mind to kind of coast, unfortunately, for a lot of us, it can become kind of our default position. I grew up, certainly everything's relative, but I grew up kind of poor and compared to some other people. And sometimes I could kind of have a prejudice about people who had a lot of money. You know, the kid whose parents bought them a brand new car when they were 16, or the one who always had the designer clothes, and I never had any of those kinds of things, and so I could be prejudiced the other way. Like, well, clearly if you're like that, then you've got to be stuck up, or you've got to be snobbish, or you've got to be. Prejudice works every way, right? And it's always been a problem, and it's always been a problem in the church, and that's the truth. Mm-hmm. But another thing that's true at the same time is that the Church of God remains the hope for the world. I think Christ showed us the better way, and I think His Spirit moves in us when we ask Him to, and sometimes even when we don't ask Him to help us live that plan that He's laid out. I think we're better and can be better than we are. We're better than we know we are, and we can be better than we. I'm stumbling.
No, yeah.
But I think we can be, and I think that's the goal. And I think as Christians. As Christians, we have to aspire to something else. And sometimes it may feel a little bit fake. You know, for the church here that received this, the next Sunday when someone did come in rags and they smelled and they looked like they'd been drinking all night the night before, I'm sure there were some guys who immediately when they saw him said, oh, man, that's one of those. But then because of this teaching said, but I'm going to live like Christ. And they went up and said something anyway, though their instinct told them to stay away, though their gut was telling them to avoid somebody like that, and they pushed themselves to do what Jesus would do. And I think in pushing themselves to be the kind of person that Christ wants us to be, they were changed. They were transformed. And certainly the other person who came in, who's wearing rags, he's also transformed by this radical love that's unlike anything else in the world. Those two things are true. It's always been a problem, but the Church of God remains the hope for the world, and we really can become, I think, who God wants us to be. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, I think on the talk on everything I said, it seems pointed at the church. Maybe the wording should have been at people.
Sure.
Overall, as people, our problem is we are selfish.
Right.
It costs us, but the church is called to pay that price. To it costs us, and we do it. Yes, that's right. It's sacrificial. It's sacrificial love. It's going to cost us something. And I think you said that well. And I may have been saying, why does the church do this? People, we're selfish, but our call as followers of Jesus is to not do that.
Well, and I do it. I mean, I may not do it about some of the things that get so much press. Hopefully, I'm not a terrible racist or a terrible homophobe or a terrible. But I can be prejudiced. I mean, we all do that. When you walk into a room, you instantly make it, here's somebody I need to go spend time with. Here's somebody who's got something going on. Here's somebody who would make me look better to be in their orbit. You don't process it. You just do it. Mm-hmm. And you do the other thing, too. Here's somebody I need to avoid. Here's somebody who's going to be a drag on my time. Here's somebody who, if I get stuck with them, I'm going to be in a corner by myself, and that'll be awful. And James is encouraging you not to think that way because, again, Jesus didn't think that way with you. Mm-hmm. Thank God. So that's our story for today. That's our Let's Talk episode. Hopefully it spurs some conversation. And as always, you can let us know some of your thoughts about this topic by commenting below, and we'll try to respond to those as quick as we can.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week.